Hi, everyone, and welcome to Ryerson University's Creative Innovation Studios web series called The Prediction, talking about tomorrow, today. And my name is Shruti Shekar. I'm a telecom and technology reporter for Yahoo Finance Canada. And of course, I have the director of the Creative Innovation Studio, Ramona Pringle, here with me to briefly talk about what this web series is going to be about. And then I would love to bring in some of the leads for some of the segments, some of the cohorts, to talk a little bit more and have some in-depth conversations. But first of all, hi, Ramona, how are you?
Hi, Shruti. I'm great. Thank you. I'm so excited to be doing this, and I'm so excited to be doing it with you, especially.
Absolutely. So before we start, I really wanted to get a little understanding on what the Creative Innovation Studio is. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. The Creative Innovation Studio is a network of creative incubators housed within the Faculty of Communication and Design at Ryerson University. And so we work with students and we work with teams from industry across creative sectors. Within the Creative Innovation Studio, there is the transmedia zone where they're working with journalists and media creators, people working with AR, VR, gaming, all sorts of new platforms, lots of podcasting as well, but really pushing the boundaries and trying to solve a lot of problems that those industries are coming up against. There's the fashion zone and the design fabrication zone. So we've got teams that are working in everything from new media type installations to the future of performance and interactive performance, robotics, little delivery robots, but also interior design and architecture, and how all those spaces become hybrid even in this current moment, right? Like what is our relationship to space? What is our relationship to the environment around us? So there's fascinating teams doing fascinating work. And historically, the membership that we work with, whether it is students, sort of post-grads or people from industry who come in and want to be in that incubator space, are looking at the frontier, the sort of boundaries of what's possible and what's known, and trying to innovate and create new forms of audience engagement, of emotional experiences, of creative experiences and creative products. Right now, this year, we're running something called the Recovery Cohort. And that was really in response to COVID-19 and what it did to the creative industries. I don't think it's an overreaction to say that in many ways it decimated the creative industries. It put a lot of activity on pause, a lot of economic activity on pause, which has been really challenging for a lot of independent creators. And so everywhere from shared maker spaces to movie sets, production sets, to, when you think of fashion and retail, how are people getting their products to consumers? All of that needs massive re-envisioning. And so there's an element of recovery and rebuilding, but also an element of reimagination, because if we are going to rebuild, let's do it the right way and let's embed the values in what we're doing in this future that we're able to create of all these creative industries.
Absolutely. And I'm really excited that you mentioned all of that, because I think that's what this web series really is going to be about. It's taking everything that you said and breaking it down and having some really nice, thoughtful conversations around everything. And with that, I just really wanted to thank you so much for being here and letting me host. And I'm excited to introduce our first guest. So thank you so much, Ramona. All right. So Ashley Lewis, hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Great. So Ashley is a new media artist, and she focuses on interactive installations, bioart, social justice, and speculative design. She is she does a lot of advocacy work. She's overall an incredible person, and she leads the fabrication design cohort within the CIS. So, Ashley, before we get into some of the nuts and bolts of everything, I was wondering if you can kind of give me a little definition on what design fabrication really is.
Yeah, so the design fabrication is an incubator that focuses on material or tech-driven creativity. So our zone members are individuals who are exploring things like costume design, drones, robots, new media, installation, art, even wearables. We have a huge scope of what's possible inside of the design fabrication zone.
Okay, so wait, I want to talk about wearables, because I, as a person who loves technology and reports on it so much, I'm obsessed with wearables. And I'm very curious to know, we're in such a weird climate with COVID-19. There are so many issues happening. Will we see a growth in wearables and wearable design?
I think so. I mean, the the scope of wearables really sits on a foundation of non-technologically driven physical objects we have to wear. And so as we all know, I suppose we're all zooming in from our own homes, so we're not wearing masks, but like the obligation to wear masks and face shields has completely skyrocketed. And so that leaves space for us to think about, how could these be designed in a way that's better? How can we design things in a way that has data incorporated in it, a way to capture information, which, you know, historically has always shown a spike of wearable design and wearable creation. So I think this is the perfect time. We're in a world where we need data, and a world where we have to wear new things that we've never had to wear before. So I would be surprised if we didn't see wearables really hit the market in a new wave.
Absolutely. And you were kind of talking about how creatives can really help in the design manufacturing of wearables. How would creatives be able to help, especially during the COVID-19 crisis? Is there a way where creatives are able to leverage wearables and create wearables to actually help?
Yeah, we have a great team inside of the Design Fabrication Zone led by Adam Kingsmith. It's a team called EIQ. And inside the Design Fabrication Zone, they're working on a technology that is connected to a wearable that helps you track your emotional well-being, which might not be the first thing we would assume is relevant at this time. Obviously, COVID requires all kinds of other metrics, but there's an enormous amount of responsibility we have in isolation to check in with how we feel and how we're doing and moderate that as well.
Yeah, and I mean that's such an interesting point, because our mental health is seriously put on a strain right now. So it's quite fascinating that, creatives are able to actually leverage the use of this. But has COVID-19 actually been able to verify companies that are able to help with mental health? Like, is this possible?
Well, the great thing about what we've been discovering through aiding the EIQ team is that now more than ever, it's been demonstrated that we need to have connection to therapy, have connection to, systems of support. And so Adam's team has been working with therapists to verify the structure of their both desktop app and the wearable that helps track the heart rate, that gives you the data you need to understand your flux in emotional well-being. And just the other day, we were in a call with Adam where he said that, this kind of field and this practice has been more in demand than ever before, because people are struggling. And even if they aren't struggling, people are aware of the potential to be struggling. So I think that it's totally cemented the necessity for mental well-being infrastructure, both in technologies, but also in the community. The
thing about design fabrication that I've kind of also realized is that there are so many other facets to it. There's, immersive performance, there's immersive theater, stage performance, there's so many other facets. I'm wondering if you can kind of talk to me a little bit about some of the challenges, despite having technology. Are there any examples that you can give on how, a group or a company is able to survive or are facing challenges because of COVID-19?
Yeah, this is a huge problem in the space of interactive design and experiential art and experiential services. The fact that we can't gather and the fact that we can't be in enclosed spaces connected has completely derailed things like Sleep No More, which is an immersive theater experience, wildly popular. Things that like festivals and events, and everybody who works in the space of gathering, I think, have had to really decide how they're going to pivot in this world. So there's lots of really wonderful examples of taking some of those immersive theater opportunities and pulling them into the Zoom room, but there are people who are doing things outside of that scope as well. We have some really exciting teams who have to pivot. There's no other choice. We have to pivot.
And what does that mean? Like, when they're pivoting, what are they doing?
Yeah, I think it is different for every creative team. But to me, the most common conversation I'm seeing in the world of art, design, and fabrication is pivoting by asking themselves, okay, so we can't gather. We don't have access to spaces. We can't pull crowds in like we could before. Who are we? Like, what at the core of what we do is meaningful? What are people missing from us that is outside of the realm of space, outside of the room of gathering? And I think a lot of people are discovering that they're the ones who bring untold stories forward, that they're the ones who bring untold histories forward, that they're the ones who speak on behalf of communities that usually don't get that platform. Maybe they're the ones who bridge unlikely communities together. So I think that a lot of people are recognizing that at their heart, they're storytellers.
Absolutely. And I mean, despite that, I think there are still some challenges in being able to tell your story. Are there any other ways in which, designers or creators are able to express themselves and tell their stories?
Right. Well, we have a fabulous team in the zone led by Candace Dixon. It's a team called Sugarcane. It's a prime example of what we're talking about, because here's a team that is invested in Carnival, an experience you have to have together. If you've ever been, it's really sweaty, it's really hot, it's very close, and many different crowds. They have VR experiences, 3D printed elements to their costumes, but what do they need to do now in COVID? And so they're really taking stride in their role as a storyteller. They've reached out to the CBC. They have archive footage of Carnival from the last 45 years. They're speaking with elders, and they're really capturing and archiving stories to become this online space, as well as the Carnival space in the future, that's sharing the histories of the messaging behind their work.
Amazing. That really segues nicely into introducing our next lead, Andrea Romero. She's a lead for fashion, and obviously, as you mentioned, Ashley, there's so many creatives working in fashion. But Andrea, I would really love to continue that discussion. Andrea is actually an entrepreneur turned intrapreneur, mentor, and advocate for the Canadian fashion tech industry, and I'm really excited to talk about this next segment with you. Obviously, the fashion industry and just industries on a whole have faced so many challenges. Entrepreneurs in Canada, because of COVID, are likely and should be ready to lose 50 to 80% of their employees. And I think that's just really jarring and very disheartening to hear. We're also projecting that more than 70% of startups have to, terminate full-time employees. I'm wondering from your perspective, before we get into the ramifications on losing employees, can you talk to me a little bit about the fashion industry and sort of your cohort?
Absolutely. So when it comes to fashion, there's often a misconception that fashion is about design and really about design and clothing and accessories, but it's so much more than that. It's in everything we see and touch. It inspires collections from interior design to furniture, even the designs of our phone and how wearables need to be fashionable or we won't want to wear them. So when it comes to fashion and how we're working with the cohort, it's around fashion, service, design, and technology. And we incorporate all those things. So someone can apply and be part of our ecosystem if they are working on fashion in one of those segments.
So when we were talking about, the industry on a whole facing so many challenges, losing employees, just facing so many issues, what are some of the ramifications on these changes, these mass changes occurring in the fashion industry?
Yeah, it's very unfortunate, but when something like COVID hits and your sales are down or your investors pull financing because many people lost a lot of money, it really has a negative effect on your business, and you have to let go of people to make ends meet. So founders and entrepreneurs who are already wearing so many hats to try and run their businesses now have to let people go and take on the additional responsibilities of being a customer success expert, shipping and logistics, marketing, social media, and everything else. And what happens at that point is they're working in their business, trying to keep it afloat with 70% and for some 100% of employees gone, versus really working on their business and thinking, what are opportunities for me right now in this changing landscape? What can I do to thrive and produce something that's going to make our society better? And when you're working and just trying to get people their stuff, which isn't getting to them on time because shipping is so delayed, you don't have time to think about what's next. And that's really one of the biggest ramifications for entrepreneurs.
Okay, so speaking of what's next, I mean, what can, these creators do? What can these designers do to stay afloat, to stay innovative? I mean, what can be done there?
I mean, so this is really seeing an opportunity and trying to design for it. And that's really why we work in such an incredible space. When it comes to fashion, what are the opportunities? I mean, when COVID hit, everyone forgot about fashion if it wasn't track pants or sweatpants, to be honest with you.
The secret is I'm wearing sweatpants right now.
I know, or slippers on your feet, right?
Yeah.
And if you make stylish boots as well. But just speaking about it and bringing us back, it really comes down to some trends that are out there right now. The notion of digital fashion and not having to own pieces of clothing.
Wait, what does that mean? What does that mean exactly?
So if anyone is a gamer, you play Roblox or Minecraft or any of those other games, you have an avatar and you can buy clothing for that avatar. So you're spending money on a file of clothing that you actually it's not tangible.
Okay.
And for some of these games, like even on The Sims, you're paying upwards of $100 for a piece, like a file of clothing for your avatar. So think about this in the fashion industry. It's really about, yes, it helps with prototyping because you don't have to actually go to a sample maker, digital prototyping. You have a digital file that can fit on a digital model. But when it comes to actually like actual fashion, you can have, if I'm an influencer and I need to show that I have new content, but I can't get clothing, imagine I could just put, a Burberry jacket that's a digital file and Photoshop that into an Instagram post. And that's an opportunity that if a brand can team up with a technology company and say, I really want to explore this because I sell to 90% of my customer base are influencers, there's an opportunity there. And because they're dealing with shipping and logistics and maybe making athleisure right now, they don't have time to do that.
That's insane. So it sounds like a lot of companies are really pivoting their strategy. What are some businesses that are doing, to stay afloat during this crisis? What are they doing to pivot?
Yeah, so really it comes down to more, when we're looking at innovation, it's more incremental innovation because they're providing there was a call to get masks and ventilators and PPE, and the industry as a whole
basically switching gear, essentially.
Everything. If you have the capacity to manufacture X, can we now manufacture Z? And that's really where the industry came together. You had auto manufacturers, producing ventilators. In fashion, one of our companies that's actually part of our accelerator cohort at the Creative Innovation Studio, Recovery Cohort, they took on a pledge to make 1 million pieces of PPE using their network of seamstresses, sewers, contractors, and they're just finishing up that pledge at the end of this month.
Are you allowed to say what the company name is?
Yeah, of course. It's Wuxley Outerwear. So they produce vegan outerwear jackets and products, but instead, COVID hit in March when their season was ending, and they used that network to create 1 million pieces of PPE.
Okay, so that's great and all, but what happens after, in the coming months? Like, will this pivoting, the strategy that they pivoted to, will that sustain? How long will it last?
So it depends on the industry, right? So if you look at masks, and a lot of designers or anyone who had the capacity to make masks started to produce masks, but now we see them everywhere, and we're not in a shortage when it comes to masks. Mm-hmm. So yes, that does have an expiration date, but when it does come to PPE, speaking to Wuxley, this is going to remain a part of their business model for at least the next year, just because they've already set it up and it's something we still need.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. The last thing I wanted to quickly leave our audience with is, it just seems that there's going to be a huge change in consumer behavior. What does that look like? Like, obviously, when we first started, people weren't really spending a lot of money because they were staying indoors, they weren't really going out. But what does that mean in terms of our behavioral change?
Yeah, so as consumers, because we're all consumers, we've gone through a psychological roller coaster, since March 2020, for some earlier than that if they were traveling. But it started with the panic buying that we heard about. And actually, I've looking on social media, some of these shelves are starting, toilet paper shelves are being pictured empty again because people are prepping for this second wave. But you go through the panic or denial and then panic buying of food and items that just make you feel secure. whatever.
Yeah.
And then we were bored. We were bored as heck. So we were looking for board games and video games and bicycles and fishing gear, you name it, anything that could occupy your time that you used to spend out and about, we were purchasing it. And in all of that, because I do work in fashion, designers were forgotten. If you weren't making athleisure or you weren't producing masks, people weren't purchasing your product. And now there's really an opportunity for us to go out and try and attract these customers again with products that they need. Right now and today, consumers, we are more cautious than ever when it comes to what we're putting on our skin, what we're buying and who we're supporting. And for brands out there, it's a great time to really rethink your values and make sure that your story is aligned with your customer.
And I'm so grateful that you ended on that. You know, I think that is also what we're going to be looking in terms of the media industry, how they're going to be held accountable and how they're going to change and how our consumer behavior has changed on that. And so I'd like to introduce my last and final guest, Emilia King. She is a creator, educator, researcher with a focus on challenging the status quo in Canada's media system. Hi, Emilia, how are you?
Hey, Shruti, good. How are you?
Great. And I'm so happy that we ended on the behavioral change aspect. But before we get into the questions, because I have a lot of them, can you tell me a little bit about what the Transmedia Zone is?
Absolutely. Okay. So the Transmedia Zone is Ryerson's media innovation incubator. We have teams and startups that are really pushing the boundaries of storytelling through art, narrative, and technology, right? And that's what they were all doing pre-pandemic. And now you can only imagine what that means when every single facet of the screen industry has been affected, right? So everything from production, development, all the way through to exhibition, including the movie theater, right?
Absolutely.
Completely shifted.
Totally. And that actually segues so nicely into our first question, all about movie theaters and theaters in general. And I'm wondering if you can tell me a little bit about the challenges that we've faced because of COVID-19 with the movie industry.
Okay, that's a really good question. And before we even jump into like post-pandemic, we need to frame what was happening just before, right? Theaters already in trouble before the pandemic, right? So the rise of new streamers, Netflix, yada, yada, they've been around for a while. And they've kind of been pushing that traditional exclusivity window that theaters have had kind of to the brink, right? Mm-hmm. So before a movie comes out and it's in the theaters, used to be for months, even up to a year. And then even before the pandemic, what happened is that exclusivity window is being shortened and shortened and shortened from weeks to now, even before, a few days, right? And then same day it's released in the theater to same day it being on a streaming service. And different countries were introducing different regulations. Film festivals were kind of saying, no, unless you are in a theater, you are not eligible to receive an award at our festival. So Netflix was challenging a lot of things. Amazon Prime, they were renting out theaters just to get be eligible for those types of awards. So anyways, what happens? Pandemic hits. Oh yes, and before that, blockbusters, right? Everything's about the blockbuster, about large scale. Sometimes people said stories were thin. But anyway, pandemic hits. What happens? Safety regulations, right? Mm-hmm. Social distancing, all of that. So now, even that we've seen some movie theaters reopening, people are really wary of sitting that close to each other, right? And again,
continue, sorry.
I was just going to say, especially with the blockbuster model, which relies on scale, like massive scale exhibition, that's not going to happen anymore, right? So that's been changing.
Yeah, and then I'm curious to know as well, because this change, with the safety protocols, with the way that movies are released, it must be changing the way that producers are creating movies as well, right? I mean, are we seeing a change in the way producers are coming up with, the films? And is there also a change in the way we're seeing and what we want from these producers?
That's a really great question, Shruti. So absolutely, it's changed production pipelines, the entire ecosystem, right? So stuff was halted for a while, it came back online. Now we're seeing a much more careful and structured approach to production. People are making things in shifts, right? People are making things in little social bubbles. You have to reconsider, are you going to fly in that international guest star? Is it worth the risk to you, right? And how does that have an effect on the content that we're seeing on screen? What about intimate scenes, right? Crowd scenes. We're seeing a rise of the introduction of CG, green screen style production again, animation. Shows that before were live action. Some of them have, during the pandemic, introduced new like animated versions of themselves just to kind of carry on. So all of that stuff is happening, but you the last part of your question is really interesting too. What are people going to want to see, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, because I remember watching this like clip that was floating, on the internet. It was like a soap opera in Bollywood, and the characters had like masks on and stuff. So I'm wondering if like that is what's going to be incorporated now. Like, are we going to see more people wear masks? Are we going to see a difference in the way we're shaking hands, or like, is that going to happen? Is that the expectation that consumers want?
That's a really good question, and the answer is nobody knows, right? So early days of pandemic, what was the most popular programming, the movie on Netflix? It was Contagion. So people were looking for seeing their worlds reflected on screen in that way. But now I hear a lot of industry insiders are kind of hedging their bets on more feel-good content because they think that people have been in this dark space. They may want to see happy things, lighthearted.
Totally.
I don't know. But I think the key thing is, though, outside of the pandemic, we've been experiencing a big sort of cultural moment, right? And that's a focus on social justice, especially since the shooting of George Floyd. Yes. And so I think what people are really demanding, and this has been reflected in the industry, and we'll talk about that hopefully next, is a desire to see themselves and their stories represented on screen. And then behind the screen, equity, right?
Yeah.
Opportunities.
And are we going to see that? I think one of the biggest challenges is keeping people accountable or holding people accountable to the things that they're saying. So is this all just lip service in terms of the changes that we're seeing, seeing more representation or having better, social issues addressed in films, et cetera, like in media, or are we not going to see it?
That's a great question. And the truth is, like, nobody knows. So what we've seen so far, a reaction from the industry, more education for allowing people to understand barriers and how the system has perpetuated these issues for a long time. So we're seeing more education. We're seeing the rise of more incubators that are focused on getting BIPOC, by BIPOC, for BIPOC content to the screen, right?
Yeah.
We're seeing more mentorship, even more funding. The government of Canada recently introduced a new entrepreneurship fund for people of color, which is so exciting. But whether or not that actually sticks, whether or not that actually shows a real commitment, we don't know. But an interesting idea that we have been running with at the Recovery Cohort is this idea of ethics by design. Okay. And that idea is all about building in these big questions around ethics and your values into the core of what you're doing, right? So in the context of the production industry, if every producer and every lead can think about how are you incorporating people in terms of hiring, whose stories get told, where are your stories coming from, right? What kinds of practices and social norms and standards are you introducing and perpetuating in your own productions? And if everybody thought about it from the ground up in that kind of core fabric level way, we definitely see a change.
I mean, I hope. I think only time will tell. I hope that change happens. But Emilia, thank you so much for joining me, and I really appreciate the really sound discussion. So thank you so much, Emilia. I really appreciate it. Well, that's all we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us and being part of this discussion. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to comment on this link. Don't hesitate to send us some information or any questions that you have. This is going to be a monthly series, and the hope is that we're going to have more in-depth conversations. But I really wanted to just introduce everyone and make everyone feel like they know what's happening. And I think it's a really important time to be having that discussion, especially during COVID-19 when the recovery efforts are everywhere and there seems to be a lot more discussion that needs to happen. So make sure you tune in next time. My name is Shruti Shekar, and thank you again for watching.